Welcome to another tutorial about Geometry Dash 2.2. In this tutorial I will show you one of the most complicated triggers I have found in 2.2. It's the item compare, the item persistent and the item edit trigger. I will show you how to use them and what you can use them for. If you like my video, it would be nice if you leave a like or even subscribe to my channel. You're always free to ask proper questions I couldn't answer in the tutorial or suggest more tutorials to me. Have fun. So at first we are starting here in the editor. I have platformer mode, spider mode and 4x speed on just for showing it to you. And there are no other options set for now. We start with a item edit trigger. I, by the way, would recommend you to watch my time trigger tutorials in order to understand what I'm doing here with the timers, because in this video I will not explain if I set up something in the time triggers. What I have set up for this one, you please watch the other tutorial, because it would make it much longer if I explain these three triggers as well. So I start here with the item edit trigger. The item ID 1 is just one item ID ID 2 is the other item ID you're entering here. Be added, subtracted, multiplied or divided from each other. But all of that I will explain you in a bit. About the mod, it is just like a multiplicator. You will have the possibility to multiplicate or divide the result of these both, whatever you do with these both item IDs with that mod here. That is 1.00. You can make it double, like that the result of it gets doubled or even halved or even negative, whatever. But that one I will also explain you, of course. And the target ID is the one which get edited, because it's the item edit trigger. And it edits an item ID, of course. And it edits the item ID which you're entering here in that box. Here, right of this, are the boxes where you can choose whether you have an item, whether you have a timer, whether you have point, whether you have a main time. This is like the time which Geometry Dash counts and not which you set with a time trigger here. The timer is with a time trigger, the time is the main time. And attempts are of course the attempt. For this one you also don't need an item ID. And for the target you can do for the item, for the timer or for the point. That means if you hit this trigger after all, then the item ID you have set here will be changed to what you have set here. This is for now the basics. If you haven't understood it yet fully, it's okay, because now I really will explain it to you with examples. So for examples, I will set item ID 1 to 1, item ID 2 to 2, and the target item ID to 3. And we first will just use item. This one I set to the default is 1. Now you're wondering what happened here below. If you pass this trigger, then our target item ID, the item ID 3, will be the same as item ID 1 added with item ID 2. And for this one, I will now set what item ID 1. The count I would say is 4. The count of item ID 2 will be 6. And the count of item ID 3 I would set as 15. Now to show it to you, I would also add here the item IDs as texts, so you can always see what we have set here. Item ID 2. And item ID 3. So now if we start, we have all the three item IDs always set here. So item ID 1 is 4, item ID 2 is 6. That one I will make touch trigger and multi-trigger, so we can always see what will happen. You saw it before, but I will show it to you again. We have now set that item ID 1 is 4, the other is 6, the next one is 15. The item edit trigger here, which I will mark here with a circle if I go in game later, says that the item ID 3, the target item ID, will be replaced with item ID 1 added to item ID 2. That means if I go there now and hit that touch thing, then 4 and 6 get added and the 15 gets replaced with 10, like what 4 and 6 are together as a sum. We can now go a bit more in depth, since I guess you got now approximately what this trigger does. So what these green buttons are actually doing. This green button is for the target item ID. That means if you have here same as, like this one, then it will not be included in there. If you have plus, then our target item ID will be item ID 3 plus item ID 1 plus item ID 2. We can test it now. It's 25 now. If I go there again, it adds 10 again. That means it would always add to item ID 3 what item ID 1 and item ID 2 are together. This is what it is for. You can also subtract, you can also multiplicate, you can also divide, whatever. But I will keep this tutorial simple. This one is how item ID 1 and how item ID 2 operates to each other. Whether you will add item ID 2 to item ID 1, whether you subtract item ID 2 from item ID 1, whether you multiplicate item ID 1 and item ID 2, or whether you divide it. And this one is for the modifier. Means if you have a modifier like 2, then you can multiplicate the modifier as I have told you, or you can divide the mod. What we can do now is you can multiplicate it with 2 at the end. 4 and 6 are together 10, multiplicated with 2 is 20, so item ID 3 will be 20. Here I show you 20. And if I set here 0.5, then 4 and 6 are 10 together again, and multiplicated with 0.5 is 5. Then our 15 gets to 5. So now we are going into what these both buttons are doing. For this one I have set here 1.15. So now we have here our 4 and 6, which makes 10 together, gets multiplied with 1.15. These buttons here are for rounding. Second one was if you have a target item ID 3 in here, that you can round everything, or you only round everything except the target item ID. I gotta explain you what this rounding means. The RN standing for rounds to the closest integer. That one means that here we have our 10, and 10 multiplied with 1.15 will make 11.5 as a result. If we have 11.5, then it will round it to the closest integer. Like if I will set now 1.14, then the result of 10 multiplied with 1.14 be 11.4. If it rounds it to the closest integer, then the result would be 11. If I set 1.16, then 10 would be multiplied with it, and the result would be 11.6, and the closest integer from 11.6 would be 12, because 12 is closer to 11.6. This is what RN doing. I will show you for short. Now it gets 12. And now I set 1.14. Now it's 11. So if I would do now 1.19 and use the FL, that's the floor function. That means regardless how high it is, if there is like a point behind it, then the number would round it down to the next lower integer. Like We have here 10 multiplied with 1.19 would be 11.9, but it would not do it to the closest integer as we had it right now. It will lower it to next lowest integer. So the integer would be 11 here. I show you. 11. Because this one will always round down what you have right now, regardless if it's 11.1, 11.3 or 11.9. It would always lower it to the next lowest integer. The last one is the ceiling function. It does the opposite as the integer. So regardless whether you have 11.1, 11.3 or 11.9, it would always become 12. It was always rounded up to the next highest integer. In our case it's 12. I can show it to you with 11.9. It's 12 then, and if I set it here now with 11.1 as a result, then it's also 12. Now we are talking about these buttons here. These buttons are to make something always in the positive number area or in a negative number area. This one is like the absolute. This makes everything always in the positive area. And I made here the item ID 1, which is 4, and this one is 6. That means 4 minus 6 would be minus 2, actually. I show you. Minus 2. But if I add here now the absolute, it would not be minus 2, it would be 2. Because the absolute would make every number always positive, even if you add here minus 1 million. If you make negate, this one, negate, then everything would result here will always be negative. So having a minus before. Item ID 1 and item ID 2, you now add will result in 10, and if we have it negate, then it would be minus 10. And as well, this button here is for item ID 1, item ID 2, and if you use the mod, and if you add here the target item ID 3, then the second button as seen below is for our target item ID and all the others which are after. You can also combine it. So what we can do right now is the example with the timers, and later then I will show you the item, combine it with the timers. But at first I will just do the timer. We do it all step by step, of course. We'll set it now that the timer of item ID 1 and the timer of item ID 2 would be added to each other, and then our timer 3 will get overwritten. So we are using here now the time triggers. This is for item ID 1. I will set this one on 3 seconds. This one is item ID 2, which I set to 7 seconds. And this one is item ID 3, which I set to 25 seconds and make it counting down. On everything I have here the start, pause, and I will also edit here all and make them seconds only and time counter. So they will only show now the second. And as we have set here, time 1 is 3, time 2 is 7, and time 3 is 25. You remember time 1 and time 2 gets added to each other, time 3 will get overwritten. And if we add each other, then 10 should be the result. So I would make this one touch trigger it again. and here we have 10 now. And if we count it down now, I can run here again and it would get 10. Yeah. It counts down 1 second instantly, this is why it doesn't get to 10 instantly. What we can do now with the item edit actually, like how you can use it, we can make this one spawn trigger. Yeah, and we add here the group ID 5. We're adding here group ID 5, our next free one. And if you wanna make a game like where you are on time pressure and you have to jump fast, and if the time is over you die, just like in the Mario games or something like this. Then you can also like add here like the pick up IDs here, like the timers to pick up. And then we make here like enable group, enable group 5. And this one is now spawn triggered and multi-triggered, and here's also 5. And every time the time gets collected, 5 gets activated, activating our item edit trigger here. Then we can make that here our item ID 1 is item ID 3 and item ID 2 stays the 2 here. Item ID 3 will be overwritten with item ID 3 and with item ID 2 added on it. That one we can remove again, that it shows our item. Now let's make 5 here. So this one is now 5. And the time counts down now. And if I collect now the clock, it adds 5 seconds. This way you can add the time if you want to make a time pressuring jump and run. Here I start the time now. And here we have now 27. And here we have now 29. The next one and the last one for the item edit one are now the points. And I will make this one a point counter. We're giving us here 1 point. Like you actually don't need here to set an item ID. Here, 1 point. This is how to use the points here, and the rest is easy. You can do here now the points together with item ID 2 will be item ID 3. Now I will move here the time counter. So we will remember item ID 3 was 15, item ID 2 was 5. Now I collect this one, I have 1 point. 1 and 5 is 6. This is how points working, and this is how you can combine it and using it the way you want. So now we have here the item compare trigger. Here we have now our item compare, touch triggered and multi-triggered as our item edit trigger. And now we can compare item ID 1 and item ID 2 with each other. I set here again item and item ID 1 and item ID 2. I have deleted the third, by the way, because we don't need the third one anymore. And these control triggers are also now set to time item ID 1. That means now the timer of item ID 1 will get started or stopped. What is the compare trigger for? The compare trigger is, as I said, it compares two item IDs with each other, and depending whether it's true or false, like if item 1 and item 2 are as you have set up here down below, then one of these two group IDs will get triggered. I'ma look what are the next three group ID. One is 3 and the other next three group ID is 5. Then I will set here 3 and 5. here false ID was 5, so if item ID 1 and item ID 2 are not as set up here down below, then it gets red. So we can set up here now how the item ID 1 and how the item ID 2 should be compared to each other, and it's actually similar build up as the item edit trigger. This one operates between item ID 1 and mod 1. Like now we add to item ID 1 what is set here in the mod 1. And this button is adding, subtracting, multiplicating or dividing how mod 2 and item ID 2 are operating to each other. And this one here is how these both results will operate to each other. Like if we set it as this right now, this one is setting here whether item ID 1 operating with a mod is larger than item ID 2 with mod 2, or that one is larger and equal than that one is smaller than this one is smaller or equal than this one. This one here is meaning if it's not same as, that means item ID 1 should not be same as item ID 2. They should be different. But at first we will do just the equal one. And here we have again our absolute. This one is operating with a first item ID. This one is operating with a second item ID. And we have here also our rounding again, floor, sailing, normal. And this one is also operating only with an item ID 2. So I show you now one example. So we have now 0 and 0 as a count. And this one says if item ID 1 and item ID 2 are the same, then 2 ID 3 gets triggered. If they are not the same, 5 gets triggered. So if I go now and only collect 1 and they are not the same, as you can see now, our block gets red because they are not the same. If we collect now this one and this one, and you see they are equal right now, and we go here, it gets green because it's now true. And the last thing you would ask right now is how the tolerance is working. Like this one, you can set here how much freedom should the player has. You can set here like a tolerance that plus minus 0.5 can be more or not. Then it would also trigger the true ID. (1.0). So if we collect now 1 here and at the other one we have 0, then it gets green because now it's tolerating if it has 1 more or less. Like when we collect here one thing and we want here, it will get green because now it's tolerating if it's 1 more or 1 less. So this is now our last trigger, the item persistent trigger. I will set item ID 1 as a persistent one now. Persistent one means that it will not be reset even if you die. And I make item ID 1 persistent now, and I will make item ID 2 also persistent now. And here I have added a spike, the ability to die also. Pick up item 1. 1, 2, and I die. But you see now, the 2 is still staying here. 3, 4, dying. 5, 6, dying. And so on. So, this is what item persistent is doing. You can also set here a timer. Then this one will be also a time counter. And we can set here a time trigger, item ID 1. At this one, I would set also the don't override, because as you remember on my tutorial, when this trigger will not override all the time with 0, otherwise the persistent trigger will not work for this one, because this one would always override when the time and making the time 0 again. That one we don't want if we use the item persistent trigger also. Even if you die, then the time will not get overwritten and just run. Now here it goes. And I die now, and the time is just running. This is what timer is doing. And if we set these both now to item ID 2, item ID 2, and now we can add here another item persistent, making it target all, reset, and touch trigger it. We don't need to set an item ID. So what I have set here right now is that all persistent item IDs are targeted, and reset would mean that all the items which are targeted would become 0 again. And I show it to you in game, of course. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and now I will reset everything. 7, 8, and now look. Okay. And of course you can also resetting all persistent timers, but for this one don't forget to set the timer. So now our item persistent ID will only work for the timer as we have set up here. See, it would reset now all the timers we have set. So this is what the triggers are doing. I hope this tutorial was helpful. I would be happy if you leave a like or subscribe even to my channel. If you have questions, feel free to ask to my comments or suggest new tutorials. Thanks for watching. If you haven't liked it or subscribed yet, I wish you a nice day.